battle with the most powerful antagonist that the Boruto world has ever seen is on the horizon. Every single chapter of Two Blue Vortex brings us one chapter closer to the final battle between Kawaki, Boruto, Jura, and possibly some others. But if it's already been well established that Boruto and Kawaki don't stand a chance against Jura, and Kawaki's already had his limiters removed, and Boruto probably can't get all that much stronger than he already is, then where is this edge going to come from? Well, I believe that edge is about to be revealed in chapter 25 of Two Blue Vortex. And no, it's not Sarada mastering her MS or Mitsuki mastering Snake Sage mode and using it at the highest level we've ever seen. It's not even Shikadai or Inojin. No, I believe what's waiting in the wings for us in chapter 25 is the reveal of one of the highest level wood release users we've seen since Hashirama. And that wood release user is going to be able to counteract the wood release of Jura, taking away one of his most utilized attacks and defenses, boiling him down to nothing more than a flying Jinchuriki with tailed beast balls, which is still a threat, but less so. But who is this wood release user waiting in the wings? Why are they just now being revealed, and why are they so powerful all of a sudden? Well, today we're going to be answering all those questions and a whole lot more, because today we're talking Jura's biggest weakness revealed. But before we get to revealing anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're looking for one additional NC Hammer 23 video a week, guys, you can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. We're in the Forest of Death, and, well, Sasuke and Naruto are taking a little bit of a nap. So, as we all know, chapter 24 of Two Blue Vortex brought an end to the third fight that we've seen between Jura and Boruto. And this third iteration of the battle between these two panned out very similarly to how the first two panned out. That is to say that it ended with Jura absolutely spotless and Boruto rather roughed up, with Boruto retreating in some capacity and putting a big old pause on this possibly world-ending fight. And now that this fight has been put on pause, Boruto and the rest of Team 7 are making their way back to Konoha. And there's really nothing in their way on account of the fact that they're all using Boruto's flying Raijin to jump back to a piece of metal in Konoha that Boruto has already triangulated. In fact, it was such a certainty that the second that Boruto triangulated on the piece of metal in Konoha that they would be able to disappear from this battle, that even Jura conceded that the fight was over, returning to the Shinju hideout and telling Hidari all about how Kawaki praised him. And Boruto and the rest of Team 7 being able to make an unfettered return to Konoha is pretty important right now, because Konohamaru has Moegi's Soul Thorn, and Konohamaru just found out through his planning with Shikamaru and his interactions with Matsuri that Moegi's got some pretty serious feelings for him. And while Konohamaru, who's been best friends with Moegi ever since he was a child, probably would have had some pep in his step to get the Soul Thorn back to Moegi in the first place anyways, after hearing from not only the Hokage, but also the Divine Tree iteration of your childhood best friend, that your childhood best friend is deeply in love with you, is gonna accelerate the process of you getting the Soul Thorn back to Moegi and freeing her just a little bit. And there is really nothing, and I mean nothing, getting in the way of Team 7 returning the Soul Thorn to Moegi. I mean, Moegi was bitten by a claw grime during the claw grime invasion of Konoha in chapter 1, and therefore, rather grimly, she's locked up inside of a tree in the middle of a street in the center of Konoha. And as Konoha kind of operates as a neutral city right now, there's nothing stopping Konohamaru from beelining to where Moegi has been for the last couple of days, if not weeks, and giving her somehow, some way, her Soul Thorn back. Now, obviously, there are ways that this event could be postponed. It's widely speculated that Mamushi, who may or may not have any kind of respect for the decrees of Jura, is going to launch some kind of invasion against Konoha. As in the 10 past predictions that Kashin Koji saw, we saw that Mamushi was walking down the streets of what appeared to be a city with some iterations of clones of himself. And as he's after Ada, the only city that he would really be walking down the streets of in an invasion type sense would most likely be Konoha. However, the launching of this invasion by Mamushi next chapter feels unlikely. See, I believe that chapter 25 of Boruto will most likely be very exposition heavy. Part 2 of Boruto has barely had any time to breathe whatsoever. While there have been some more talking heavy chapters than action heavy chapters, we really haven't had one of those since roughly chapter 15 or 16. That is to say, before this battle against Matsuri and Ryu began. Well, some of you are probably thinking to yourselves right now, oh, well, that was only like 9 chapters ago. 9 chapters ago was 9 months ago. And thus, for 9 9 whole months, Boruto has been stuck in action mode, not explain mode. And thus, as it currently stands in 2 Blue Vortex, there is a lot more unanswered questions than there is answered ones. How are Boruto and Kawaki gonna find the strength to defeat Jura if they don't have it right now? Will Boruto be allowed back in Konoha now that it's been identified that he's battling against the Shinju? Will Inajin be able to rise from his hospital bed? What's going on with Himawari? If Boruto comes back to Konoha and Shikamaru fights for him to stay in Konoha, will Konohamaru be stripped of his title as Hokage? And so on and so forth. There are a ton of questions that are lingering. But some of you are saying right now, almost every single chapter of 2 Blue Vortex ends with either some kind of big cliffhanger or some kind of big reveal. And thus, what will be the big cliffhanger or reveal of chapter 25 if it's going to be all exposition and answering lingering questions? Well, I believe Moegi's release from her tree prison will be the big reveal. But why is that a big reveal, some of you are asking right now? I mean, Moegi is a nothing character. We literally haven't seen her in combat in Boruto's manga. The reintroduction of her into the story means literally next to nothing except for the possibility that her and Konohamaru might get to explore some kind of romantic connection like they're on the Love Island version of the ninja world. Because God knows Hanabi also wants a piece of that sweet, sweet Sarutobi. But I think Moegi's release will bring a whole lot more than just new romance to the villa. Because Moegi's release will serve as an example. An example that no one, when released from their tree-like prisons, will come back as the same person they were when they were originally bit. See, as some of you may remember, we saw that Team 10 is involved in some kind of fight in Kashin Koji's future projections, as we saw a roughed up Inajin standing in some kind of cave that looks eerily similar to one of Orochimaru's caves. And in the panel next to that roughed up Inajin, we saw Shikadai. This seems to imply that sometime, probably soon, Team 10 is going to be involved in some kind of high-level combat that's going to cause for Inajin to get pretty roughed up. Now, as to whether or not that's combat against the Shinju or combat against Team 7, we can't really say. However, what we do know is that at the end of Himawari and Team 10's battle against Jura, when Team 10 decided to retreat, saving Inajin's life and bringing him to a hospital so that he'd be able to recover from the wounds that Jura gave him, Jura not only tipped his proverbial cap, but also told Shikadai that he would see him again, implying that the battle between Jura and Team 10, and most likely Himawari, is not over yet. This is doubly backed up by the fact that we also see in Kashin Koji's 10 pass prediction that Himawari is involved in some kind of fight. A fight that she would presumably only be involved in if she left the confines of Konoha, because Konoha is a safe space. And quite honestly, Himawari being threatened by Jura seems like one of the only logical ways that Inajin would actually be able to leave the hospital. See, Inajin had a cannonball-sized hole punched in his chest with wood release. And even though Himawari was able to heal him basically completely, he's still been unconscious for days, if not weeks. And therefore, the idea of him being able to re-enter the battlefield with Sakura and Ino watching over him feels incredibly unlikely, which means that Inajin would most likely have to sneak out of the hospital to re-enter the battlefield, and he would really only ever do that if Himawari was in danger. And as Inajin understands the threat of Jura better than maybe anyone in existence, if Inajin heard that Himawari was being targeted by Jura, that would most likely motivate him to push himself to leave the hospital early. But if Team 10 try to fight against Jura once again to protect Himawari, what's stopping this fight from ending literally any differently from the first time they fought? It's not like Himawari or Team 10 have gotten particularly more powerful, and Jura definitely hasn't slowed down. Well, the answer could lie with Team 10's Genin leader, Moegi. See, Team 10 has been stripped of their Jonin leader, well, basically for all of Boruto. Well, yes, in Chapter 1 of 2 Blue Vortex, she's taken out of the mix by a claw grime, and therefore Team 10 has to operate on their own. But if we're being real with ourselves, even before she was a tree, she was barely relevant in the story, never showing up when it matters, even if Team 10 was there. Like when Boruto was trying to escape Konoha after supposedly killing Naruto, Team 10 was there to stop him. However, even though Shikadai, Inajin, and Chocho were all battling against a known Hokage-killing fugitive, Moegi, their Jonin leader, was nowhere to be found. And quite honestly, this is a glaring weakness of just Boruto as a story, and one of the ways that Boruto differs from Naruto the most severely. See, one of the most interesting things about Naruto and Naruto Shippuden was the involvement of the Genin leaders, the Jonin captains. Not only their involvement in things like important battles, but also the relationship that these adults had with each other. See, Kakashi and Might Guy, and to a lesser extent Asuma and Kurenai, are really the #1 adults that we interact with for the early part and later parts of Naruto. They were interesting characters, and they injected adult relationships into this relatively child-focused focused story. But more than anything, when they showed up on the battlefield, we understood that things were gonna be okay. Whether it was Might Guy flying into a battle against Kisame or Kakashi battling against Zabuza, we understood for a vast majority of Naruto that the Jonin that were leaders of these Genin squads were stronger than the Genins that they led. And thus, when they showed up, we could all release a collective sigh of relief. However, that is not the case in Boruto. See, outside of the fact that there's really only two Genin squad captains that matter in all of Boruto, those being Moegi and Konohamaru, Team 5, which is led by Udon, the third person in the three-person Konohamaru gang, is basically non-existent in the manga. And don't even get me started on Team 25 and all the basically other anime-only Genin squads that do technically exist in the Boruto universe. Really, when it boils down to it, in this new generation, there are only two important teams. Team 7, which is headed up by Konohamaru, and Team 10, which is headed up by Moegi. However, even though there are substantially less Jonin captains than there used to be, both Konohamaru and Moegi play substantially smaller roles in the story than their predecessors, like Kakashi or Might Guy. And worse than that, they offer nothing in the way of additional strength when they're on the battlefield. Like, yes, has the scaling of the Boruto universe far surpassed anything imaginable in the Naruto universe? 100%. And therefore, this new generation has had to raise to that level to stay relevant in these most important battles. However, if this new up-and-coming generation is able to accomplish this, and the previous generation, like the Gokage of current, are able to rise to this challenge, then it would also make a fair amount of sense that the people stuck in between these two generations, that being the Naruto generation and the Boruto generation, would also be able to rise to that challenge. However, every single chance that Konohamaru, and to a much lesser extent Moegi, have ever been given to rise to that level, they fail horribly. However, even though the change is marginal at best, that narrative has begun to shift for Konohamaru. See, because, well, Konohamaru getting his butt whooped in part 1 of Boruto was basically an ongoing joke. In 2 Blue Vortex, it is clear he has done some training. He has got slightly more powerful, which has allowed for Konohamaru to do things like repel attacks from Hidari, and to even almost completely eviscerate Matsuri. And while Konohamaru was not the person who strikes the final blow into either of these two scenarios, meaning he is still a far way off from filling Kakashi's gigantic shoes, this is technically positive progress. Positive progress that can be capitalized on if Konohamaru were to do something like, oh, I don't know, train with Team 7. Now, will Konohamaru ever be able to achieve the role that Kakashi had in Team 7 for the entirety of part 1 of Naruto? Most likely not. From the jump, pretty much every single one of his students was as powerful, if not more powerful, than him. But he is still a Sarutobi and an accomplished Jonin, who's shown the ability to stand up with some of the most powerful foes the Naruto world has ever seen. He has a foundation that can be built upon. He has his toad summons, his monkey summons that, mind you, he's barely ever tried to use in any practical setting in combat. On top of this, his known connection to Mount Muabuko and his ability to summon toads does technically leave the door open to the idea of him maybe, just maybe, getting Sage Mode one day. I mean, this is the guy who's supposed to be the stopgap Hokage between Naruto and Sarada, kind of like Kakashi. But if Konohamaru has a somewhat clear path to a Kakashi level of relevancy, what's Moegi's path to a Might Guy level of relevancy? Well, it's pretty quick and easy. It's only 3 words, and those 3 words are the Soul Thorn. See, well, Konohamaru does have a path that allows him to reach a Kakashi level of relevancy using just his current skills. Moegi doesn't. If she's returned from her tree prison at the same level of strength that she had prior to being bit, she has no path to relevancy, at least not one that makes any sense. Because, of course, technically, we haven't really seen Moegi in any meaningful combat. And therefore, if after she's released from her tree prison, it gets explained to us that she's always had Matsuri's level of wood release control, we can't sit here and be like, oh, yeah, of course. I mean, she's the first natural-born wood release user since Hashirama. Why wouldn't she have insane control over this Kekkei Genkai? But that would be just bad writing. See, because if Moegi did always have a Matsuri level control of wood release, a level of wood release that's closer to Hashirama than it is to Yamato, the idea that she would have been bitten by a claw grime, regardless of the fact that she was trying to shield a mother and child, just doesn't make sense. See, the only reason that Sasuke was bitten by a claw grime is because he had to fight claw grimes and code simultaneously. However, if the reason that Matsuri had a level of wood release control that was comparable to that of Hashirama without his Sage Mode was because Moegi had it before she was bitten by a claw grime, would make the whole idea that she was bitten by a claw grime just seem odd. But the idea that Moegi comes back from her tree prison with new and improved wood release jutsu abilities because of her fusion with the essence and chakra of Matsuri through the connection of the Soul Thorn makes a whole lot more sense to me. Not only from the narrative perspective that, oh, Moegi was weak enough to get bitten by a claw grime before this power-up, but also because of what that power-up would mean for everybody else who's currently trapped in a divine tree. See, Matsuri was in charge of not only creating new Shinju, but also healing the current injured ones, as she was not only responsible for the creation of Ryu, but also the recreation of Hidari. And while it does appear as though Jura also has a very competent control over wood release, and therefore those responsibilities now fall into his hands, the fact that Matsuri was able to do it obviously stems from Moegi's ability to use wood release. But still, Matsuri's ability to use wood release was not unique amongst the Shinju. Jura could also do it. And in fact, wood release is pretty much the most common type of jutsu that Jura uses. That and tailed beast balls. But he used wood release to kill the Konoha wall guards, to stab Inojin through the chest to make an offensive barrier against Kawaki's energy blast, and to make himself a throne that he could sit in as he glared down at Kawaki and Boruto unscathed from their attacks. But Jura's reliance on wood release could be his undoing now that Matsuri's Soul Thorn is being returned to Moegi. See, everything around a Soul Thorn is just wood. All of the abilities, memories, essence, and chakra of a Shinju exist in their Soul Thorn. That's why an entirely new Shinju can be built around a Soul Thorn so long as the Soul Thorn itself is not injured. So there's absolutely no reason for us to believe that all of the power of a Shinju is not kept inside its Soul Thorn. And Moegi is about to be fused in some capacity with the Soul Thorn of Matsuri. Now, does this mean that Moegi is going to awaken to all of Matsuri's abilities? Probably not. Will Moegi claw her way out of her tree prison with Rinnegan and access to the claw marks? No. I mean, yeah, technically there's no reason for us to believe that it's not a possibility, but the idea of Moegi being a dual Rinnegan user or even a singular Rinnegan user seems kind of absurd. On top of that, the idea of Moegi gaining access to a Shinjutsu like the claw marks also seems kind of absurd. But here's the thing. Every single Shinju has access to some kind of unique jutsu. Jura uses tailed beast balls. Moegi used wood release. Hidari has the Chidori. And Mamushi probably has shadow clones, we're not entirely sure. And last but not least, Ryu had a level of iron sand control never seen before, even when Shinki used it. Every Shinju has a unique ability that ties back to the person that they were originally created from. And in almost all of those scenarios, the Shinju has access to a level of that unique ability that the original simply didn't have access to. Matsuri's wood release is better than Moegi's. Ryu's iron sand control is better than Shinki's. And while we can't honestly say Hidari Shidori is better than Sasuke's on account of the fact that Hidari can barely use it because the Rinnegan doesn't operate like a Sharingan, the line of logic still tracks here. However, with all of this said, I believe rather than the people locked in their tree prisons getting access to dual Rinnegan or the claw marks, they'll see these iconic jutsus used by the Shinju amped in themselves when fused with the Soul Thorn of said Shinju. Shinki's iron sand will get stronger. Moegi's wood release will get stronger. Sasuke's Chidori will get stronger. But if Moegi's wood release gets stronger, let's say to the level of Matsuri's, that puts Moegi in a very, and I mean very interesting spot, because we just established that Jura really only uses two jutsus, his tailed beast balls and wood release. He also uses claw marks, but not really offensively, he just uses them for teleportation. What if Moegi was able to counteract the wood release of Jura, either wrestling him for the wood that he's trying to control or simply clashing her wood against his? See, we've never seen a battle between two wood release users take place in the Naruto universe. Yes, we've seen Hashirama battle against Madara after Madara had Hashirama cells grafted to him, but we never see Madara try to use wood release against Hashirama. We don't know how this battle would pan out, and this opens up the door in a massive way for Moegi to return to relevancy. Well, not return, but gain relevancy. See, because on top of the fact that she might be able to counter Jura's wood release, it's important to remember that Jura is the Ten Tails, and wood release suppresses the chakra of all tailed beasts, the Ten Tails very much included. As Hashirama was able to use the God Deity Gates, which is one of the most powerful usages of his wood release to hold down the Ten Tails in the Fourth Great Shinobi World War. And what some of you are saying right now,
well, but Jura's got wood release, and therefore wood release probably wouldn't work against him.
I'd like to remind you that the Ten Tails in the Fourth Great Shinobi World War had wood release. I bet you Neji wishes it didn't, but it did. And therefore, if wood release could work against that Ten Tails, it would stand to reason that wood release could work against this Ten Tails, Jura. However, there is an important caveat here. A couple of months ago, I popularized a theory that we were completely wrong about wood release. That rather than a wood release user simply controlling just wood that exists around the world, that in actuality, wood release users are controlling the roots of previous divine trees. This brings up a somewhat interesting issue, because the reason this theory worked so incredibly well is because if wood release is simply controlling the roots of the divine trees, it explains why wood release is able to suppress the chakra of tailed beasts, because these roots of the divine tree are supposed to be able to absorb chakra in the first place. That's their singular purpose. And all of these tailed beasts are an extension of the 10 tails, the very thing used to make a divine tree in the first place. Now, this brings up an interesting problem with Jura, because not only is Jura technically a divine tree, but also the 10 tails, he can also use wood release. And if we're assuming that he's controlling the roots of old divine trees, and taking into consideration that for some reason the Shinju hideout seems to be in a root well made from the roots of a giant tree, there's a possibility that any and all energy absorbed using wood release actually feeds back to Jura through the medium of the Shinju hideout. Which I know sounds bad for the idea that somehow, some way, Moegi will be able to absorb the chakra of Jura, but in that literal same breath, if that is the scenario, that only heightens how important it is for Moegi to be able to counteract the wood release of Jura. And therefore, regardless of if Moegi is able to suppress Jura's chakra using her wood release, she still holds an incredibly relevant spot on the battlefield to counteract one of Jura's most powerful moves. And I believe that spot is going to be reserved to her in chapter 25. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Do you think Moegi's going to take a step into relevancy in chapter 25, or do you think she's going to be forgotten like she has been in the rest of Boruto? Let me know in the comments below, and while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've heard the swell at Manhattan Beach Pier is good today, and, well, who am I to say no to that?